the agenda for the day is, for the morning is on the screen. We'll briefly start with an opening remark on my side, and then we'll transition into the key presentation for the day. We'll then have a respondent to that, followed by a Q&A and interactive session. I think that is one of the key touch points we would like to get to as soon as possible. And then we'll close the session. So that is the presented overview. And thank you for that. Once again, I feel this is a very important webinar. The topic is a very key topic, and it's coordinated by the Eastern Cape Socio-Economic Consultative Council. We'll call it ECSECC or ECSECC. I'm Clayton Jacobs, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. And thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to quickly flight my screen or my face so that we can put a face to the name. That is me. I would keep it on, but just for bandwidth constraints, I'll be putting it off at this point in time. So we then will swiftly transition into an overview. I hope everybody is safe and warm, especially in the light of the severe weather that recently has affected and impacted many parts of our country. As I mentioned earlier, it's a coordinated effort by ECSECC, and specifically to delve a little into a study that is entitled Economic Resilience Through Renewable Energy. By way of introduction, I'm Clayton Jacobs, as I mentioned. I'm a project development manager for energy projects at Coega Development Corporation. Some of you might know Coega is the operator of South Africa's largest special economic zone, and it's based in Kavese. Our mission is to drive socio-economic development and in this particular region, where we manage nearly 10,000 hectare land parcel, and it supports the development of various sectors, which includes logistics, automotive, light and heavy industries. And very critical for today's discussion, we also have a footprint within the energy space. My background is in chemical engineering. I've got a master's degree which focused on the application of clean fuels. So I've got a vested interest in the energy space. Over the last years, my career has spanned academia, R&D, software, automotive, and the heavy industry. And through these experiences, one constant had stood out, which is that energy in all its forms is a critical enabler for growth, productivity, and stability. When energy supply is unreliable, when infrastructure is mismanaged, or when costs become prohibitive, the impacts rise and cripples across every sector. And this worsens economic decline. So these challenges are especially acute in vulnerable provinces like the Eastern Cape, where poverty, unemployment, and structural constraints are deeply entrenched. So we gather here today because I believe, I think we all have a vested interest in the region, and we believe that change is possible. Change requires leadership, coordination, and a shared commitment to action. It starts with an honest reflection, as if a gap analysis that helps turns challenges into opportunities. So I believe that ECSECC had undertaken this particular study as some sort of a gap analysis, which provides compelling evidence on how targeted renewable energy investments can help socio-economic reverse the effects of socio-economic damage caused by load shedding and how we could stimulate job creation and build a more long-term resilient economy. So I look forward to a dynamic conversation today's session, and I encourage everybody to participate later in the discussion. So we'll then kick it off. I'll then like to introduce our key speaker, Dr. Kambale Kavese. He'll be leading us through the study he's undertaken. I'll just give a short bio before he comes in. Dr. Kambale Kavese is a senior economist at ECSECC and a guest lecturer at Nelson Mandela University. And we also earned his PhD in economics. He holds an honors and master's degree in economics from the University of Johannesburg. His previous roles includes an economist at the Department of Human Settlements, deputy director at Stats SA, and a senior manager at KZN Treasury. So it's a man of wealth of experience and knowledge. He's also on the board of Walter Sisulu University. So, Dr. Kavese, please, if you don't mind, giving us an overview of the study that you have undertaken. Thank you, sir. Dr. Kambale, are you?
Yes, good morning, colleagues.
There we go.
Yeah, I'm going to share my presentation. I hope you can all see it. I don't know if it's clear on your side.
Perfect. Clear on my side. Did you put it in full screen mode?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that much better?
That is good. Very good. Thank you so much. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Without wasting time, I'm going to take you through the research paper that I've conducted recently. It was last year on economic resilience through renewable energy. There are so many other papers that we have presented. This is one of them. The study, in terms of introduction, this study employs the economy-wide socio-economic metrics, SEM-based Leontief multiplier model, really to assess the adverse effect or the impact of load shedding on key macroeconomic variable in the province. So the study also uses the micro simulation techniques to examine the impact of a 29 billion investment through the Independent Power Producer Procurement Program that is called the APPPP in the renewable energy. So this is a investment that represent around 6.9% of the project of the GDP or 21% of the provincial budget of the Eastern Cape. So the objective, or let's call it rather the aim of the study, is to determine whether this substantial injection of 29 billion into renewable energy project, if it presents a transformative opportunity to mitigate the negative impact of load shedding in the province, and whether it really contributes to promote economic resilience. So, in a nutshell, this study, the finding will seek to provide the net impact, the net effect. How? By comparing on one side the adverse impact or the negative impact of load shedding on one side, and on the other side, the positive economic outcome generated by the 29 billion investment in the renewable energy project. So this is what we're trying to do. And I think this is one of the contribution of the study, in a sense that we're not only looking at the impact of load shedding and say, okay, here's the impact of load shedding, this is its contribution. But we're trying also to come up with a solution and assess whether that solution can mitigate the negative impact of load shedding. I'm not going to bother you with the problem statement. We all know that in the last 2 decades, the GDP of the province averaged around 1%. That is to show how the economy has stagnated over the past 2 decades. We're not going to bother you with the issues of unemployment and so many other issues that we all are aware of. So the study seek to address 4 key questions. These 4 questions are being translated exactly. The 4 questions are also translated into our research objectives. So I'm not going to go through the research questions because they're the same as our research objectives. So the first research objective, what we're trying really to achieve here, is to conduct a comprehensive economic analysis of the energy sector, the sector as a whole, which include your water, electricity, gas. Yeah, that's the energy sector as a whole. So, and also forecasting key determinants of electricity production and distribution and their implication for load shedding. Secondly, we trying to assess the effect of load shedding on selected macroeconomic variable. So we want to see what is the impact of load shedding, how does it affect our GDP. So this is now an empirical side of it. So empirically, we want to assess using macroeconomic model to see how load shedding affect our GDP, our labor force, and total production output. Thirdly, we're going to run some simulation to check the impact of increased government spending in the energy sector, the Eastern Cape, and how does that affect overall other macroeconomic objective of the province. So in this third simulation, it is more on the fiscal policy of the province. And lastly, our fourth objective is to evaluate the economy-wide impact of the 21 billion IPPP investment in renewable energy in a province, and to determine, as I said before, the net effect of the net effect between load shedding and investment injection of 29 billion injection into the economy. What if to assess whether there are benefits generated by this investment. In terms of our research methodology, I don't think I should bother you with all these equations. You know, the SEM and GAMES model, they involve a lot of equations. The model have over more than 100 equations, but I don't think in this platform, we're not in the academia at this point of time, but briefly, I'll go through the research design, how the SEM was calibrated. We're going to take you through the models and the simulations techniques that we used. So this is the structure of the Eastern Cape macro SEM. And we're going to see that this SEM comprises 7 metrics of 41 activities. It's the model that we use, the model that we use to investigate renewable energy sector, to model it. So we have 43 commodities, and one of these commodity is, one of these activities is our energy sector, one of the 43. And we also have 43, so we have 43 commodities, 43 activities. We have 5 factors of production, 5 factors of production. Our model is disaggregated into 12 household levels. We did not disaggregate government to look at the provincial, national, provincial, and local economy, so we aggregated that. We only have a metric, our investment and the rest of the world, which is really your international trade, your import and export. So that is the structure of our Eastern Cape SEM. Now, in terms of data, we're looking at the methodology. We continue our methodology section. We look at the data. In this study, we used State SA data. We are aware that in 2022, State SA published a report and data on load shedding. And that study provided sectoral insight into output losses and employment reduction across industries. And since the SEM, the social accounting metrics, which is the model that we use, is structured around sectors and industry, so this data was really a blessing to me because it could fit properly in the model. So the data was used to run some simulation on the impact of load shedding on the Eastern Cape economy. The second data that we used was derived from the Department of Mineral, Resource and Energy, DMRE, which have launched a program called Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. This program was launched in 2010 as an urgent government intervention to enhance South Africa's power generation capacity. So the program's primary mandate is to procure electricity energy from private sector, leveraging both renewable and non-renewable energy sources. So in this study, we're going to look at this 29 billion rand and see what this study will investigate the impact of this investment on the Eastern Cape economy. Now, just proceeding again with the methodology of the model, we are all aware of the traditional input-output. Okay, in a modeling family of the economy-wide impact assessment, in that family we have our traditional input-output. That is a very old traditional model that is based on a 53 system of national account, and it has been updated to what we call the supply and use table UNTIF model, which is mainly on sector by sector or industry by sector by sector. But we have And from the SUT model, we have what we call the social accounting metrics, and lastly, the CGE model. These four are the economy-wide model that I used. And but in this particular research, we've used the social accounting metrics, which could later be transformed into a CGE model for the Eastern Cape. So the industry, all this model rely on the industry linkages for all the sector. Like I said, in my model, I have 43 sectors. So how this sector interlinked into a one single matrix. So the same model, in a nutshell, is a quantitative economic technique that captures the interdependency among different sectors of the economy. Now, when it comes to this model that I've developed here, it broadly has two types of multipliers. The first one is the demand-driven, and the second one is the supply-driven model. And the demand and supply are also what we refer to as backward linkages and forward linkages. So when it comes to the renewable energy, our backward linkages will be now. So what is that in our case? So we know that the renewable energy, which really comprises your solar, your wind, and all other ones, they stimulate demand for intermediate goods and services from other sectors or from other industry. In other words, to produce energy, you are indirectly stimulating demand for other products. In essence, this indicates how the renewable energy rely on input from other sectors, such as your manufacturing sector. And that reliance on other input will determine now in the model the backward linkages. When it comes to the forward linkages, and the formula is there for the backward linkages. So now when it comes to the supply-driven model proposed by Ghosh, it reflects the extent to which the renewable energy sector supply input to other industries, therefore influencing their production process. And this is relevant. This is especially relevant for sectors such as your manufacturing, or in fact, all the sectors which benefit from cleaner and more sustainable energy sources. Not only the sector, but also the institutions. We have government also that we use our street lights. So this sector is very important. Now, in order to, I'm closing with this on the methodology, or maybe since this is not an academic audience, maybe I should not bother people about all this, but to the same involve a lot of interconnected data structures from different sources, from sectors, from households, from institutions, from government, from the rest of the world. So balancing all this information that because we call it an economy-wide, it includes your household, it includes your labor, it includes your fiscal, it includes everything is done in one. The same is it's a matrix, like I've said, of different socio-economic agents altogether. So balancing all this, it's a huge exercise. So it can lead to errors. But now, in order to mitigate those errors, we use the mid-absolute difference, which we call a MED. We also use the standardized total percentage error. To update the same, we used what we call the Rust technique, and to balance the same with all this data together, we use what we call the cross entropy method. But let me not bother you with that. So my last point on the methodology is that to achieve our 4 objectives, we use 3 techniques or 3 models. The first one is our macroeconomic model that I used to forecast some indicators. So there it was just a econometrics to do some forecasting, and we're going to look at it right now. The second model that I use is our economy-wide social accounting metrics-based, which provide us the Leontief multipliers. And under this model, we did 2 economy-wide simulations. So the first simulation was to look at the impact of load shedding on the economy. The second simulation was to look at the expansionary fiscal policy on economic growth. In other words, what happened if government also if government expenditure increases. So we call it expansionary fiscal policy. If it increased by 10 billion and inject it in our energy sector as a whole, what will be the impact on economic growth, on labor, on productivity? And so in that term, we need to come up with a GDP multiplier, gross value added multiplier, and other trade and investment to inform trade and investment policy. So the third model that we use is called the micro simulation techniques. We call it micro because in this case now we're looking at the smaller, how the model will impact people of different, how the injection of 29 billion will inject employment of people of different gender, youth, rural and urban, and how it will affect people of different skills. So because of that type of disaggregation, and this disaggregation is what set our model apart from the traditional input-output. So I think now let's come to our findings, and our findings are going to be grouped based on the 4 objectives. So we had 4 objectives, and I will present my findings according to those 4 objectives. But the first objective really is more of a background of a sector, of the sector. So the analysis, so first objective was to show just a trend analysis and forecast of the energy sector as a whole. The analysis shows, the result shows just the trend analysis. This is just a background. It shows a low contribution to national grid. I'll show them graphically shortly. So the Eastern Cape only contributes 4% to the national electricity grid, compared to 24% in Gauteng and 90% in KZN. We also discover a declining location quotient, which really measure the comparative advantage. So it means the Eastern Cape sector has declined in terms of its comparative advantage, and in terms of the decreasing, so it has declined. The comparative advantage of the sector has declined dramatically. Thirdly, also, we discover a decrease in electricity generation. So the amount of electricity generation between 2016 and 2023 has declined. And we're going to look at this shortly graphically. Continuing with the trend analysis and forecasting, we also discover a decreased input cost, an increased input cost. And this is a serious problem. I think I could just pause here for a while, because when the cost of production increases, we call it the intermediate consumption expenditure. When it increases, while other indicators like your gross value added is declining, the implication is that the rising cost in the midst of a declining output, it will indicate inefficiency of the sector, and that need to be addressed. We also discover a declining in productivity, and we know any sector that is declining productivity, it also become inefficient. Looking at the compensation of employees, which is the salaries paid in the sector, we only discover that the informal sector is the one increasing, but other sector like the formal sector, wages in the formal sector are declining. We also, all these findings will inform our policy recommendations. We also discover an underinvestment in machinery and equipment in the sector. So investment in machinery and equipment, they have sharply declined, suggesting underinvestment in technological upgrade. So the sector technological upgrade is very important. So all those findings are represented here graphically. Like I've already mentioned, that the Eastern Cape only contribute 4%. The Eastern Cape only contribute 4%. It's one of the lowest contributor to the national electricity grid. We also discover that the production, the electricity generated have increased until 2018, but suddenly it has started declining sharply. It's just a graphic representation of what I said, that what output is declining, gross operating surplus is declining, wages and salary are declining, tax and subsidy are declining, gross value added in a sector is declining, but we see here that the cost of producing electricity is the only variable that is increasing. So the increase in this cost suggests that the sector experienced rising operational cost. That is a finding. And load shedding exacerbates this issue. Like I said, also, it's just show graphically. Like I said, we can see wages and salary declining overall, even among the lower skilled, declining, semi-skilled, wages and salaries declining, in the formal sector is declining, for formal sector skilled laborers, wages and salaries declining, and also in the formal sector, wages and salary are declining. But look here again, the real compensation of employee in your formal sector is increasing. I was wondering whether this has to do with these people going to, in the informal sector, going to put your solar in your houses, in household, those informal sector coming to replace solar geyser and all this, causing the compensation of employee to increase in a formal sector. All this need to be investigated further. I do not have answer to that. And that's more employment. Again, we can see how the employment has performed. Let me not bother you with that. When it comes now to the investment, we see how investment in machinery and equipment has declined. There's a decline in investment in machinery and equipment. So I think that is also an issue now. Let's go now to our findings quickly. Objective number 2 was to check the impact of load shedding on the Eastern Cape economy and labor. So now we are looking now at the impact of load shedding on the Eastern Cape economy. I've already told you that I got my data from State SA that wrote a report on load shedding. And on load shedding, they looked at firms that have lost output, production output, and how they've lost their labor. So those firms are categorized in different sectors. So I took that and ran it in the model, in the same model. So that was used as an exogenous variable to run it in a model, and the result shows the economic ramification of load shedding and its adverse effect on the Eastern Cape economy. So finding shows that load shedding results in a 2.8% contraction in GDP. That is it. So if load shedding persists, continue, it affects our economy by that, 2.8. Number 2, the load shedding has a profound and wide-ranging effect on employment. The findings reveal that employment will decline by 2.1%. This is reflecting job losses due to reduced production. Thirdly, load shedding affects energy-intensive sectors. And the sectors that, remember, our model has 43 commodities. So I selected the few that were highly affected. And as a result of load shedding, our manufacturing sector declined by 5.4%, mining by 2.9%, agriculture by 3.0%, and wholesale by 4.0%. So the sector will experience a substantial decline in output. And we know that the negative impact of the manufacturing sector is detrimental to our industrialization. So looking at the third objective finding, in terms of the third objective, which was to look at the expansionary fiscal policy on the energy. So now here we're going to look at what is the impact of a 1 million increase in government spending in the Eastern Cape. If government was to put 1 million rand in the electricity sector, what will happen to the total output in the province, total output of all other sectors? So the result shows that for every 1 million rand, output will increase by 3.6. Please note that output is not GDP. So to get the GDP, from the output, you still need to deduct your intermediate costs in order to get GDP, because people always think that, oh, okay, maybe our economy will increase by 3.6. No, it's the production. But remember, you can produce more, and if the cost is more than your production, you can still have a loss. So third, also, an increase in government spending will cause the overall gross value added to increase by 1.7. So 1 billion rand invested in electricity, our gross value add will increase by 1.7. That's what it means. It also means in terms of employment, that when we put 1 billion rand in the electricity sector, wages and salary compensation of employee will increase by 0.6 million. Our gross operating surplus, however, will increase by 0.9. So these two, they are talking about, these two multipliers talk about income generation as a result of an injection of a 1 billion. Meaning, we see here that gross operating surplus is higher than the compensation of employee. The gross operating surplus is the return on investment. Let's assume the energy sector was owned by a foreign investor. It means for every rand, every million rand that is invested in a sector, the return on investment in terms of, call it dividend or profit, that goes to the investor, he'll get 0.9 and he'll pay salary of 0.6. That's what those multiplier implies.
Dr.
And that I've already.
Dr.
My
Kavese?
time.
No,
Yeah.
I just want us to be considerate of time. I think
Okay.
you're actually in the meat of the discussion now, and I wish we were
Yeah.
here a little earlier. But
Yeah.
if you can just fast track it as to the key highlights of what you need
Okay.
to still sort of showcase to us.
Just one more and I'm done.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So then we look at the impact now of the 29 billion IPP investment in renewable energy. So what is the impact of that? We've done, like I said, we've done a micro simulation, and we've divided this in 4 scenarios. So the 29 billion investment, scenario number 1, it will lead to the creation of 112,000 jobs, of which 69,000 will be for male and 46,000 for female. Okay, in terms of those, and in terms of education, here are the split of the number of jobs. In terms of scenario 3, whether these jobs will be more in a formal or in a formal sector or informal sectors, the split is there. Those are the number of jobs. In terms of the distribution for skills and unskilled, the number of jobs are provided there. That will be as a result of the 29 billion investment in the renewable energy. So, like, I'm closing with the aim of the study was to show the net impact, because these are the key findings. So the way I've structured this table is that we have the impact of load shedding in black, the impact of the IPPP project in red, and in purple, we have the net effect. So in terms of GDP, the load shedding will lead to 2, and that's how we read this table. GDP will contract, or it will be negative by 2.8%. But the APP project will lead to 5.9%. And we have a net impact of 3.1. The same we do for output, same we do for formal employment, and after that I've derived the knowing the number of employment. I could use that now to see how it will decrease unemployment. It shows that it will decrease by 1.8%, and how it will affect also the investment. And I've tried to do that for selected sectors. And to show how the net effect for selected sector. But we have 43. I could not put all the 43 here. So thank you so much. I'm not going to take you through the recommendations, because at this time I'm still working on them, because I still need to consult few people to validate my recommendations. Can I close with that for now? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kavese. I think it is a very fruitful study. It would be interesting to have another engagement or follow-up from you following your recommendations. Then I will just quickly introduce my respondent. I will not give a full view of a profile, but it's Dr. Karen Surridge. We are time constrained, so we would likely run slightly outside of 11, but we'd give her some time to respond to some of the information that was presented. But Dr. Surridge, she's a project manager for renewable energy at Saneri. She holds a PhD from the University of Pretoria. She's found roots in academia, but she also founded a consultancy specializing in EIAs and compliance services. And her expertise is around microbiology and soil remediation. She's a cross-disciplinary skilled, and she's leading projects towards, at least piloting projects towards the country's just energy transition goals. So, Dr. Karen, thank you so much. Perhaps a quick response from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. My apologies for my voice. I'm fighting a bit of the flu that's popping around with this climate change events that we're experiencing. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was extremely interesting. I've jotted down just a few thoughts around this, but I'm conscious of time, and I would like to, leave some time for people to have discussions. So let me try and keep it brief. The main sort of overview of this is essentially that we were looking at demand and supply in the energy space, and the economic value chain stimulation around that as a result of the renewable energy development that we're seeing in the province. So obviously, across South Africa with what we affectionately call the REI 4P program, which is the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, which has been underway since 2010, as the doctor alluded to, has seen a large amount of investment in the country. And the question then becomes around that, well, what has this investment developed within South Africa? Have we seen economic growth as a result of this investment? And we have to transition towards renewable energy for a number of reasons, not least of which is that for energy security purposes, we need to rely on more than one resource. At the moment, we predominantly rely on fossil fuels to serve our electricity sector. And that is not energy secure, because if we run out of fossil fuels, what do we do? So this is why we're moving towards the renewable energy space. And of course, we do have nuclear also in the agenda. So if we start to focus on building the economic resilience around this, we need to, as I say, reduce that reliance or dependence on a single energy source and start to diversify our energy resources. And that's where things like the Integrated Energy Plan and the Integrated Resource Plan come into play. Now, if those plans, and along with that, most recently gazetted and published is the, in fact, it was launched by Minister Samantha Graham-Morea last week, is the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. And what that does is it actually focuses a lot on exactly what the doctor was speaking about today, and that's the economic development around the renewable energy sector deployment in the country. So by reducing our dependence on our fossil fuel resource, we then open up the space for new industries and jobs in the space. We also, and South Africa has a number of technologies in which we are leaders. For some reason, we seem to sell them overseas and then buy them back later. But the global competitiveness that we have, I think we underestimate. And if we do see more investment into the research and development space of renewable energy, particularly in provinces like the Eastern Cape, where at present, because it's not an area that's hugely developed in renewable energy, it's the perfect grounds for now piloting and demonstrating that it can be done and what makes us competitive. South Africa is full of strategic minerals. I don't need to tell, I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I think everybody knows that we have strategic minerals that talk to the energy sector as a whole anyway. So if you start looking at things like the rare earth minerals and so forth that are required for harnessing the solar energy, for storing energy in batteries and so forth, we've got the minerals for that. So what we need to be doing is attracting investment into this space. And while I was listening to all of this, one of the questions that popped in my head was, well, who's responsible for electricity provision to the country? And yes, it is government, but there is also a private sector responsibility. And in the space of the just energy transition, if we start looking at things like equity and affordability, we start seeing that shifting towards renewable energy and making it more inclusive for South Africa becomes expensive. So how do we address that? Things like social programs, we need to have the right skills to serve whatever we're deploying. We need to know what our investment needs are and then channel that towards developing infrastructure that we require in the sector to address those needs. All of this is set against the backdrop of the policy and regulatory frameworks. And if I start to look at what the doctor is presenting here in this presentation, all of this, of course, then fits into those regulatory frameworks. So what he's doing is assessing what is actually happening under those objectives that were identified. And what stood out for me was the concept, and I liked the way the doctor put it, where he said the inefficiency in the sector. So what we're seeing is there's a lot of investment coming in, but we're still seeing declines. And then, of course, the knock-on effect is the investment starts to decline. So we have this inefficiency taking place in the sector in the Eastern Cape. But what we're seeing is this informal sector growth, which could well be just a case of people needing energy security. So they are desperate. So they will use whatever means possible, and they will employ informal support to address that energy security need. Is that within the policy framework? Do the regulations, the standards, is it safe? Is that something we should be considering? Yes, we should, but that's for another study. However, the investment in the machinery and equipment is showing to be declining. So what does that mean? It means we've got shrinkage in the industry part of things. And that's not what we want to see, because we want to be growing economics. We actually want to see the machinery, the equipment. We don't want stranded assets. We, in fact, want more assets being purchased to grow the sector. And then, of course, under Objective 2, the doctor cited that the load shedding gave a 2.8% drop in GDP. I mean, of course, that is to be expected, and there's been a lot of studies quantifying what is the impact on the GDP per hour of load shedding, for example. And of course, the next steps from there will be that there's an employment decrease, because if there's less money moving around, there's less money to pay for employees. And the decline in output from the energy intensive users, the sectors that are very energy intensive. So their output is declining. There's a knock-on effect there in the economics. So the sector may be completely unrelated to energy, but it requires energy to function, high energy intensity. So of course its output will drop as the energy becomes more expensive. If electricity continues, and it will continue to increase in cost, because deploying these renewable energy technologies is not cheap. And it is not this phrase that I always hear saying, free energy from the sun. Nothing's free. The sun might be giving it to you for free. And there are two energy sources the sun's giving us. It gives us heat and light. But harnessing that heat and light and turning it into something that we can use, like electricity and process heat, that is not cheap. So one needs to consider how does this balance, very, very fine balance between making sure that we have an economic growth, but also making sure that the sectors that are impacted by the cost of electricity and so forth are able to buffer against that, so we don't see that economic drop that we're starting to see. Then, of course, investment by government under Objective 3, of course, as soon as there is investment, one does expect an increased output. And this is where the question popped in my head was, so is it government's responsibility to invest in renewable energy independent, and that's the objective word here, power producer program? Government has created the regulatory policy framework for independent power producers to come onto the grid. Up until 2010, it was only Eskom on the grid. Now independent power producers can be on the grid, but the cost then resides and the investment then resides with those independent power producers and not necessarily on the government side. So if government does inject investment into the sector, how is that achieved? And this is the question really, is how do we optimally invest it so that it achieves an increased output across the sectors? So what I did like was that last summary slide that basically shows that the investments that are taking place in the province show a net improvement across the board. So all of those were positives, including the one with a little negative sign in front, but that was a drop in unemployment. So that was a good thing. So it is important to consider that the investments that are being made into the province need to be made in a strategic manner in the right spaces to stimulate economic growth and not just be pumped into the energy sector to keep it ticking over. It has to actually be pumped into a space in the sector where it will stimulate economic growth and uptake. So with that, I think I'll make a concluding remark, which I jotted down here, and that was around the supportive policy and regulatory environment is in place. South Africa has been held internationally, globally, as having a very good renewable energy independent power producer program, and that it attracted a lot of investment, and it facilitates this transition from our predominantly fossil fuel-based energy sector to a bit more of a secure energy blend. So overall, South Africa's transition in that space has significant economic impact, but it has to be properly managed. And this is something that we as SANEDI, we are a government agency of the Department of Electricity and Energy. And our mandate, our primary mandate, is to advise policy. We don't write policy, but we advise it based on sound technical information. And the modeling studies that you've seen here is technical information that can now be translated. And there's lots of formulas, and when I see those formulas, I feel like I'm back in varsity. But what it boils down to is if you don't have a social acceptance and a social uptake and a social drive forward. It doesn't matter how much economics and modeling and numbers and technical things we do, if the social uptake is not there, you will not see a growth in the sector. So I think it's very important to consider that the topic that this seminar was addressing specifically looked at economic resilience, but with a social aspect as well. And that social aspect will allow this economics to improve and increase within the province. And I will pause there. Thank you, Chairperson. It's Clayton. Yes, Mr. Jacobs. And I'm also happy to take questions about anything if it's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Surridge. Excellent response. We've got one hand at this point. Is it Vuyo Boy? Please come in and voice your question.
Oh, yes. No, thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. It's unfortunate that the juicy part only came towards the end. Dr. Karen, I like that your input, your last point with regards to the social impact. Perhaps one would have to engage with the paper to kind of get a sense of what it speaks of in terms of the skills transfer, because what I've noticed with all these projects of the renewable energy, taking in specifically your wind farms, that when they start at its inception, you're getting a lot of jobs that would be, say, 500 jobs that would be made available, but those jobs are not sustainable. You'd get them for about 3 months, 5 months, and then as the project going closer to the end, those jobs are fading away. But the sad part that I've realized is that there is no skills transfer program that these companies that are doing these renewable energies or these winter farms are basically enforced to commit to. You'll find that the project will be done. You look at Eastern Cape, for instance, there was one in Oyster Bay, and one in Nojeli, and in Nguba. Now, if you were to go back there in terms of skills development and what was left after those projects have been completed, you'd find that there's none. So should there be an issue in terms of servicing those, there won't be anyone. You still have to outsource those skills. Whereas during that space of that project, that could have been something that was considered. Now, the last point, just with this wind turbine that I've just mentioned now, with the overall, from what you guys are saying in terms of the paper, Eastern Cape shouldn't be experiencing load shedding, especially considering the consumption of energy within the Eastern Cape. And with these wind turbines contributing 368 megawatts, and that there is a data now from 2019, I'd like to think it has changed. So we shouldn't be experiencing load shedding. I don't know whether the study has gone into that, because for me, perhaps I'm looking at in terms of, are we doing this research in order to justify renewable energy at the expense of powered coal stations? And the fact that when we're building these other wind farms and renewable thing, we don't consider the grid capacity. Where is my point? Now you find that where the electricity is supposed to go, it is situated in the northern east part of South Africa, where a lot of consumption is situated. So now you still have a problem in terms of connecting these farms into the grid, even after having spent billions in constructing them, but no plan in terms of connectivity to the grid. Let me end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. It's a loaded question. I think it was directed at Dr. Surridge, but I think Dr. Kavese, if you would like to, you can also come in. But firstly, Dr. Surridge, if you can provide some response.
Thank you. Let me answer the question backwards, so I'll come to the skills last. So the first one around the load shedding in the Eastern Cape and where the energy is being generated and where it's going to. Remember, South Africa has an electrical grid that is national. It's a national electrical grid. Now, the national electrical grid carries approximately 50 gigawatts, not megawatts, gigawatts, 1,000 megawatts to a gigawatt. Around in its what we call its fleet. So its fleet includes a bit of renewables, and there's only about no, it's not even, it's 6.8 is behind the meter. So it's about 3 gigawatts of renewables, a little bit of nuclear from Koeberg, and the rest is coming from coal-fired power stations. Now, South Africa is heavily reliant on coal. We are blessed with a lot of resource. We have very good quality coal. We export most of our very good quality coal. And we keep the rocks that have a bit of coal in them and we grind them up and we burn them, and we're very good at it. We've been burning coal for a very long time, and we are very good at burning coal and creating electricity from it. So the load shedding that's happening at the moment is there's a number of reasons behind it, but one of the reasons is that coal-fired power stations are built to last 40 years, roughly. Now, you can keep them ticking along a bit, if you like, for a bit longer. But what ends up happening when you do that is that they become less efficient and their emissions become outside of the parameters that they're allowed to function within. So the older power stations anyway have a problem with their functionality and their output. They're becoming less efficient. So what then happens is it costs more to keep them running than what they are actually putting onto the grid as well. So that does become an issue. And I'm just looking quickly for a slide here that I can show you the average hour. It was at a presentation I gave last week. But anyway, over and above that, so the load shedding that we see happening is, as I say, for a number of reasons. But here are, if you will allow me, Mr. Chairperson, and if we have a little bit of time, I'm going to take control of the screen and share just these two slides. The first one is this one, and I'm hoping you can see it. This is our Eskom generation fleet. Now, these are just our coal-fired power stations. You can see the two young guns down here, Kusile, and Medupi is now 10 years. Kusile is 8 years old. Coal-fired power stations are designed to be decommissioned at this point, at 40 years. Let me just get my little laser pointer. So what we've got is an average of all of our stations is already at almost 45 years. So stations like Komati, which is the one that's been in the news a lot, which has just been decommissioned, is 65 years old. It has to be decommissioned. And in that space, all the infrastructures there, remember I spoke about stranded assets, all the infrastructure that is there to move electricity around. So why not plug in another energy source there since we can't use the coal anymore? And that's something to consider in this space. As to you're talking about the jobs that are created, absolutely, you are correct. The jobs that are created when renewable energy farms are being, and I'll talk to this slide in a second, are being constructed, there's a lot of them because you obviously need, you need someone who's digging the holes, who's putting in the base plate for the wind turbine and then the tower and so forth. You need the people that are putting it in place. Most of the independent power producers are backed by international companies, so they bring their own people to do the technical. Now, in that space, South Africa has, at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, SARATech, which is the South African Renewable Energy Technology Center. And they train wind turbine service technicians that are internationally accredited to work on the turbines. And we have a number of them that have graduated, obviously, over the years through that center. So there are skills in South Africa. But what's happening is when you take technologies like solar and wind, not so much solar, but wind does require some upkeep because you're working with the nacelle, which has got an engine in it, so it does require maintenance. But a lot of the time, the companies that own those wind turbines want their own technicians working on them. So a lot of the technicians that we see training to work on these are being absorbed actually into the fossil fuel sector eventually. So it is a space where it's definitely something that South Africa needs to be meeting those skills, but we need our independent power producers to be South African based. And at the moment, predominantly they are international. The slide that I'm showing you at the moment is some information that Eskom releases on a weekly basis, and it talks to the Eskom energy availability factor. Now, what it means is what's the energy that's available at any given time in terms of a percentage. And a normal healthy grid overseas, let's say anywhere in the world, you would want to be above 70%, preferably above 75% for a healthy factor for your grid. So we have aging power stations and an aging grid. And we have only just managed to get to that 70% once last year. Other than that, you can see this is this year's line. We're sitting below 60% energy availability factor for the whole year. So what that does is it puts strain on all the assets in the electricity space on the grid. And therefore, the grid itself, which is taking a beating anyway because of this, will struggle to take an intermittent power source like renewable energy and harmonize it into the grid and keep it stable. So Eskom is aware of it, and there is definitely, it's not that nobody knows that this is the case or nobody thought about it. Everybody thought about it. It's been modeled. It's known that this is how the grid functions, and that the grid, because we have an aging infrastructure and we have this low energy availability factor, that the grid actually is going to struggle with any new energy sources being plugged into it. And that's why you saw on the bid window that was announced towards the end of last year that there was no wind placed in the Western Cape. And it was purely because Eskom said, wait, we don't think the grid's going to be able to handle more wind injected onto it at that point. So it's a very complicated, and as you say, Clayton, it's a very complicated, loaded question. But then there are so many different facets to consider with it. But I hope I've managed to address some of the discussion, but I'm also happy for people to contact me if they have specific questions around it. Sorry, it's very broad because we don't have a lot of time.
Absolutely. I think it's very well put. Thank you, Dr. Surridge. I think we might take one more question, if you would allow us to do so. If there's one more question, there's Ian Assam, and it's going to be a last question for the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you very much. This is addressed to Dr. Kavese. So obviously we've heard that the independent power producers are predominantly foreign owned. I'm just trying to see what is how is Dr. Kavese factored that into his model. I'm not sure what the South African percentage ownership is, but I know let's say it's less than 50%, and it could be for BE, it could be, I think it's 30-odd%. I'm not sure what is the effect of that on the model, and how that has been factored into the model in terms of contribution to GDP, etc., especially when some of those profits then leave the country. That's the one question. Then obviously the other issue is around whether, and I think the other doctor was referring to the fact that there's some issues also around connectivity to the existing grid. I'm not sure whether all the independent power producers are connected and always connected to the grid, and whether all of that power is then fully utilized or not, because that also may affect the model as well. Maybe Dr. Kavese can just speak to those two issues. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kavese?
Okay, thank you, Ian. I did not investigate whether the APPP is, foreign owned by the percentage of ownership. That I did not establish. I was only interested on the investment, the 29 billion that is invested in the Eastern Cape. And in terms of the impact of that, we're looking at it now on the generation of income. Like I said, the gross operating surplus. So for every 1 million, you see that when you do now your multiplier, in fact, throughout, the return on investment will be 0.9. That goes to the owner. In accounting system, we call it dividend. So if you own a business, you have a dividend, which is your return on your investment. You have tax, and you have a portion that you pay to your workers. So in terms of what you receive it as an owner, as a gross operating surplus will be 0.9 versus 0.6 million that you pay to all your workers. So this show that if the APP is foreign owned, 0.9 is going outside the country to those foreign owners, and 0.6 is used inside the Eastern Cape for workers in terms of salaries. So that is the only impact that I can show from the model for now. So meaning that if this investment, if the investment was from local owners, we will have 0.6 that goes to the workers in the province and 0.9 that goes to the local owners, which will again circulate in economy and have additional ripple effect. So that's how I can explain. But going back to the previous speaker, he was saying whether we should have load shedding in the Eastern Cape. I think even the maybe I can give a bit of a on the numbers. Number one, we have all the equipment. Number two, we have shown that investment in machinery have declined. Number three, we have shown that there is a declining in electricity generation. So these three factors can already explain why we should also put their potential reason for the province to have load shedding. And we know that when we look at the data that we got from State SA to model all this, the data is get at firm level. So when there is load shedding, you see, let's take a firm like a restaurant. When there is load shedding, the restaurant won't cook. But now, when